I'm a great lover of Thursdays. They're Jupiter's day, and I'm Mr. Jovian Archive, and the tradition of Jupiter and the tradition of Thursdays is that it's a great day to tell a story. And so much of the cosmology is rave cosmology is reflected in some of the experiences in my process, and strange things. 1987 in the late spring, I was living in Toronto in Canada, and I was very much caught up in the fast lane, as they would say. And I had a media company, and I was making television commercials, and the first of the generation of rock and roll videos and things like that. And there was this extraordinary experience of being pulled out of all of that. I mean, it's not my intent tonight to tell that story, but nonetheless. And with the net result that, in an 8-day period, I went from running a large media company with a lot of responsibilities and blah, 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 and other things, to simply being gone, having vanished. I have a funny thing with names. It's one of the great jokes of my life, is the name game. My mother, I was her 4th child, and it was a very difficult pregnancy because we had incompatible blood types, Rh negative problems, all this business. And in those days they did not have what they have today, which is drugs that they can give to the mother. And what they did in that era was that my mother was continually on blood transfusions. And because she was, in that era, a woman having a child late in her process, she was nearly 40, the doctors felt that there was no way that she could physically carry me to term. And I think that any mother that goes through such an ordeal in having a child, that when that child finally emerges, and I was taken out about 5 weeks early by cesarean section, the very fact that I survived, and the very fact that she had suffered so much for that survival, that there was a particular attachment that she's always had. I mean, she's 94 years old. We still have an unusual connection to each other. And she always wanted to have a little boy that she could call Bobby. And she told my father that she wanted to name me Robert. And he didn't like the name. And he didn't like Bobby at all. And he wanted to call me Alan. And I don't know what their process was about all of that, but anyway, he ended up registering my birth as Alan. And my mother raised me as Bobby. It wasn't until I think I was in the 5th or 6th grade that I was suddenly informed by the teacher that I had to go to the principal's office because they couldn't find my name on any records. They were dealing with Robert, and the only legal registration was an Alan. Anyway, when I disappeared, I ended up in Ibiza through a whole series of very strange kinds of allies along the way. And I had one of those serendipitous encounters with somebody I went into a place I had been told to go to, that it was an easy place to make, contacts, and I went in there, and there was this man there. His name was Harrison, and he was American West Coaster, somebody who came from Seattle, and had been basically a sailor all his life, working commercial ships and all these kinds of things. Had great stories to tell, which of course he loved to do with people. And anyway, he started up a whole conversation with me. I assumed that he only got one chance at people, if you know what I mean, to tell whatever his story was. And in the course of that, he asked me my name. And I guess it was the beginning for me of what it meant to have to surrender to a process that you didn't understand and that you weren't in control of. I mean, one of the assumptions that people can have, I don't know if they do or not, it's just they can have, is the assumption that somehow this name Ra was, was something that I selected in that sense. Okay, I'm going to give myself a new name, or whatever the case may be. And more than that, the assumption that I had already built in all of the Egyptian mythology and so forth and so on, which I had not. Because the fact was that when the man asked me my name, I intended, at least that would have been the most natural thing for me, to say Robert. I mean, I can remember distinctly, he had put his hand out to me when he gave me his name. And I can remember as I reached out with my hand that there was this, this Robert that was coming out. The Ra came out, but there was no Bert. The name suddenly was just truncated, and it wasn't like I was thinking, I'm Ra, the sun god, or, any of these associations. It was very much a kind of, isn't that bizarre? There was no Bert. And what was so fascinating about just saying Ra, aside from what it felt like acoustically to have that go through my head, because I was surprised. I mean, if you come into this life with the sun in 51.5 exalted, there are some absolutely exquisite shocks in your life that you managed to survive, and it was an exquisite shock. It was just there. It had been called from the fisherman's lips. It had nothing to do with intent or purpose. The reason that I'm beginning with this whole preamble is we're going to talk about the sun. And we're going to begin anyway to talk about the sun. And it is such an extraordinary thing, after all. It is the holy of holies. It is life itself. And becoming Ra was an interesting process. I know, Bimala, that you have your question, because part of my IBI Z to A autobiographical project includes a book I'm writing. Interesting for me as well, because I'm writing it in the third person, so it's a fascinating process. And I'm writing about what happened to me from the time I landed until the time I met the voice. What that process, at least from this hindsight now, what that process was like. And one of the first things that was necessary for my survival on the island, because I came with nothing and I had no resources, was that I needed to find work, and I ended up with getting a job in a country school, a very tiny British overseas school where I was teaching children from grade 7 to grade 12, actually. It was a very interesting transition. But in order for me to get that job, I had to give them a name, and my father's name is Joseph. So I became Ra Ben Joseph, and Ra Ben Joseph lived for 4 years and died quite dramatically. Something that, in the Jam Player, there's this running series. Actually, the first one has been up for a long time. It's simply to get people to know it's there. I've been filming a series of prequels to the encounter, which I'm going to release in January 2007. This is the 20th anniversary of my experience. And for the first time I will really tell in detail the nature of my encounter. And I'm doing these prequels as a kind of, give people a sense of what that process was really like. And that process was Raw Ben Joseph's life. And the thing about being raw, one of the first things that I got from people was this kind of almost snickering. You took this name after the sun god, and it was impossible to say, no, I didn't, it's just, it's my name, it's natural, it's what happened, all these kinds of things. And it drew me to look into the nature of Ra. And that in and of itself has been a process that's gone on for many, many years. I've actually had access to incredible material. And I have met many Egyptologists along the way who have given me all sorts of very curious tidbits, very odd things. And I would only give up the Ben Joseph when I met the Voice, because the Voice would give me this title of Bantu. And that was the name I was supposed to go out and use to represent who I am. But the whole business of Ra and the sun, when I had my encounter with the Voice, I was told many odd things, really odd things. The Voice always referred to the sun as the dog. Always. As a matter of fact, I only knew that it was talking about the sun through the obvious inference that came with it, but it referred to the sun as the dog. It would tease me every once in a while. In a way, I'm really anthropomorphizing when I say that. But simply that I was told twice that it was my dog. What kind of a game that is, I don't understand, nor do I understand the syntax of that. What was really just so interesting was that on the last day, when it was done with me, I was instructed to go out of the Ruina. I had been in the Ruina other than 2 minor events that took place outside the front door. I had been in the Ruina without food or water for nearly 8 days at that point. I was instructed, it was about maybe 11 o'clock in the morning. I was told to climb up the hill behind the Ruina. Ibiza is a funny place. There are no mountains here, but the light is strange. And in the light they all look like mountains. The hills are never more than 400 meters above sea level, and yet they're rather steep. And they're not difficult. I mean, they're not easy to climb. They're often filled with, the kinds of things, gorse, the kinds of things that'll rip into your ankles. And, it's always my joke about Ibiza that she's so incredibly beautiful, but she is not soft. This is not a soft place at all. Anyway. And I was instructed to go up and climb up to the top of this hill. That was arduous. I was relatively weak in that era of my life. I would normally eat once every 2 days. I lived very much a sadhu's life, very much just taking what I could from nature. And even talking about it now, I can remember what that was like to go up that hill. And when I finally crested the hill, I went out and sat on one of these big, huge stones that jutted out in a way from, the angle of the hill, and looked out over the valleys, because you could literally see from that perspective about three different chains of hills and the valleys that go over each. And if, depending on how clear it was, you could almost see all the way to the Spanish mainland. So it was an incredible perspective from up there. It was also intensely sunlit and hot. Despite the fact that it was January, we can have very, very hot days here on the island in January. And so I was sitting on the top of this hill, and it was nearly, by the time I had reached the top of the hill, it was probably noon, and the sun was, it's not extremely high in the sky because it is a winter sun, but certainly it was high enough that it was at near its peak of intensity. And that's when my relationship as Ra with the sun began. The voice gave me a mantra. Funny thing, these mantras, these ancient chains of sound forms, and how extraordinary they can actually be, how miraculous, in fact, they can be. One of the things that was interesting about the mantra I was given, it was totally alien to me. But the moment that it was given to me, I have never forgotten it. I mean, I've never forgotten it. It's like, somewhere it was hardwired into my brain. And so the voice gave me this thing and said to me, now open up your eyes to the sun. I'm an old drug shaman. I've been in every imaginable altered state that a human being could possibly imagine. And the fact that I survived all of that is that there has always been deep within me a place, whatever one calls it, a centering, a deep awareness that what's going on is an illusion, good or bad. And it may seem insane or psychotic to have this kind of an event and to be following blindly the instructions of quote unquote a voice. But I never lost the perspective of how mad it all was, how insane it all was, how incredible it all was. I mean, I had always been looking for a good show. I didn't think I'd star in it, but I was always looking for a good show. And I was unnaturally surrendered to this kind of altered experience, and whatever, I just treated it as another drug experience, another altered state of consciousness. But when the voice said to me, open up your eyes to the midday sun, there was something inside of me that said, hey, this might be going a little too far, I like to see. I love to see. I mean, beauty is the essence of my spirit. I'm only interested in beauty. I mean, for me, the body graph is extraordinary because not only is it beautiful, but it's true. The beauty. And here is this disembodied voice that's saying to me, well, go ahead, open your eyes to the sun. And then it said to me, Your name is Ra. And it's your dog. So look at it. So I opened up my eyes to the sun. No choice, after all. Wow, what a thing. I mean, what a thing. I do not recommend it. There is, the first thing is the burning. There's a burning sensation, like what it feels like when you take a quick shot of whiskey, you know. There's this burning, and it burns down your esophagus, and it burns down into your stomach, and literally sets your stomach on fire. You can feel the intensity of its fire. It's when I saw the mystical blue angel, this incredible blue form that emerges, dancing, literally it appears to be anyway, dancing within the pulse of the sun. Oh, when you look into the sun, it's alive. You don't notice it's alive when you're just walking in the world. You can't. You can't see it breathe. You can't. And when you look at it, totally, completely, without fear, just look at it. Wow. It's alive. It's breathing and pulsing. You know, you can almost sense the consciousness of it. Quite something. I remember a number of things. I remember the endless stream of tears, my eyes endlessly watering as I stared fixed into the light. Probably an hour, maybe even more. At the end, the voice was gone. It was the end of my moment of having my head through the sky. I would look into the sun every day after that, in the middle of the day, for years. I mean, for years. About 3 months later, after the end of the experience, I stopped eating. Just stopped. Seemed like a lot of trouble. And I would spend hours just staring at the sun. Just lost in there. And I went on for nearly 5 weeks like that. So there is something for me in this understanding of my connection, you know, to this force, to this consciousness field. This is all about understanding the imprinting of this great force. You know, this is really what it's all about. You take away the sun and you have nothing. This is what it's all about. So our journey today is to take a look at what that's all about in terms of the cosmology. And so we come to this plate, and you can see in the illustration that there are two things. One is the camel, and the other is the dog. By the way, that was actually expressed to me that way. I mean, unlike things like rave and G in the G Center that I saw physically, excuse me, These aspects were referred to by name. And remember what you're looking at. You're looking at the two fragmented crystals off the original center. So if you drag the dog down underneath, if you take the dog here and you put it over here, this triangle in here, this is a graphic of where the center would fit. And of course, these are the aspects that are shrouding that center. So in fact, they are the purest first generation fractal to the center itself. The band had lost love and found form. Out of form, the design crystal is dormant. In form, it builds. And of course, this is the whole key to understanding the nature of the design crystal, is the moment that you put that design crystal into an environment that has cellular design crystals. In other words, that there is form to work with, because the form is going to be rooted in the inanimate cellular designs, that they're going to be able to be manipulated by this, what is prime design crystal. At the moment they have this relationship with matter is the moment that they do what is natural to them, which is to build. Everything about the nature of the biverse is something that had to be built. It had to be built. All of it had to be built. Everything that you look at out there, or are able to see through other tools, all of these are part of very huge cycle growth processes of emergence into life and reaching potential and slowly decay and ultimately death. It's just like stars. The most fascinating thing about stars is that there's so many ways they can die. It's like us. It's not so simple that they just get peacefully old and they quietly die in their sleep. Some of them are murdered. Some of them are destroyed by other things whacking into them. Some of them just die prematurely and just blow up and explode. There's all these different ways in which stars live out their lives. These are lives, and they are lives because it is all inherent in the form principle. That is, anything that is built up ultimately will decay. It's just that simple. The moment you build something up is the moment that you expand the potential of the resistance to decay it. And that everything about the nature of the bioform is that it will always have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Always. Everything is terminal. Everything is terminal. So when the design crystal is out of form, it's dormant, nothing takes place. So the moment that they come into form, the whole movie starts. And what are we talking about? When I was growing up in the 50s, because basically my childhood was in the 50s, the big buzz was science fiction. As a kid, there was this fascination with, reaching out to the planets, the stars, the mystery of flying saucers and aliens and all of these things. And the assumption, and it was once an assumption that I held, that it would seem logical that somewhere out there, blah, 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 that there's going to be, green boo-boos doing something in a civilization unknown to us, worshipping, I don't know, whatever. And of course that fantasy is a fantasy that became a popular explosion and in many ways a self-fulfilling mythology. We are always looking for our gods and goddesses wherever we can find them. The most essential thing about those fantasies is that they are actually rooted in a truth. It isn't about concretized forms. It is about alien consciousness. We are constantly being bombarded with alien consciousness. Think about our solar system and understand what our solar system is. It's a cell, basically. This is the solar cell. And what's going on inside of this solar system is basically dictated by the sun. I mean, the sun tends to be the dominant force because it is the closest producer of neutrinos to us, and we're getting the whole whack. But we have a transcellular connection to other stars. Now, everything about the nature of a star being able to produce neutrinos is that the production of neutrino is a byproduct or is the direct result of being endowed with a design crystal. It's the crystal that generates the string. That is, it generates the neutrino ocean. Now, the moment that you have a crystal, you have the same potential. For example, the crystal in let's say Alcyone, one of the prime star of the Pleiades, mentioned in every holy book. That if you're looking at Alcyone, the crystal that's in the center of Alcyone, its dog, because they're all dogs, its dog has the same potential as the crystal that you have, except it operates out of a different construct. It is not self-reflected. In other words, if you dig into Mars, you're not going to find a neocortex. It is not self-reflected at all. What it represents, though, is a specific, unique filtering. This was the ancient knowledge of, the mystical Arabian culture, was this deep understanding of the unique imprint that every star brings. There are beings on this planet, who speak and write and believe that, there are Pleiadians, that they have met Pleiadians, that they are a Pleiadian, whatever the case may be. And I don't say any of this to belittle what their not self-illusion of this happens to be, because that is not my point. My point is that the only thing that's legitimate is that there is such a thing as Pleiadian consciousness. It is coming directly from Alcyone, and it has been one of the most important of the generalized programming agents for everything about life within this cell. But let's not confuse it with Pleiadians, or Syrians, or, any of the star fields that are out there. But it is alien. It does not belong to our solar cell. It is in fact coming from the outside, and is in fact capable of programming certain sensitives. It just is. I know the remarkable experience of having a sudden, deep relationship with a star in the sky. It can be deeply profound. I mean, after all, if you can see it, you're receiving it. I mean, the neutrinos are slower than the light, but it's coming through. You're getting it from out there. The information does move along. So let's understand the agent of all of this alien consciousness. The agent of this alien consciousness is the dog. The center sits in the heart of the sun. It sits in the heart of the sun, and it filters the string at source, building, maintaining, and informing the sun's solar body. To a rave, this is the solar system. The camel and the dog also dwell within the rave sun. They each incarnate once in a round, never in the form of raves. The dog manifests and maintains the body and the life of the sun itself. It maintains the body and the life of the sun itself. And this is the thing to understand about every single one of these stars. You'll see when we get to the end of the plates, and we are going to look at all of the faces, that what we are going to meet are all of these alien consciousness sources. And you'll begin to see, it depends on, how eclectic your mythological, cosmological background is, but the fact of the matter is that through each of those you can see all of the archetypes of the supposed forms, beings, centers of consciousness out there that we receive here. And we do. And we do. See, when I look out at the sun, I don't look at a gaseous ball of light operating out of nuclear fusion. I don't. In the same way that when I look at another human being, I don't think about how their heart is pumping their blood. I don't. I experience the consciousness that's there. And my relationship to the sun and my relationship to the stars in the sky is that I experience the consciousness that's there. The sun for me is alive. And it is alive in the sense of consciousness. This is the primary filter, and you can see that our particular sun is very significant because it operates out of a trinary process. For any star to be a star, it must be endowed with a dog. For any star to be a star. It's why Jupiter is not a star. And Jupiter, by the rules of the way in which solar systems are formed, Jupiter is a failed star. By the way, Jupiter gives out more light than it receives. Jupiter produces neutrinos, very low level, but not that low. It's about 3%. So, Jupiter by extreme astrophysicists is often referred to as a failed brown dwarf. Most of the so-called new planets that they are discovering orbiting around other suns, and they've discovered hundreds now. Most of them are even larger than Jupiter. Most of them are examples of what are a failed binary. If you look at the way in which stars exist, that there are three kinds of basic star matchups. That is, singular stars that stand alone like our sun, binary systems in which one star revolves around the other, and trinary systems that are very complex in the way in which they maneuver. The fact is that in the totality of the biverse, the most common are binary systems. That is the most common. The rarities are single systems and trinary systems. So, for example, the development of our particular solar system, it didn't come up to binary level. It didn't reach there. It's also interesting to understand, because we're going to talk a lot about Jupiter as we move along, to really understand why Jupiter, Zeus, has always been, at the deepest mystical level, the Logos. Because it is fundamentally different from all the other planets, because there is a unique programming agency to Jupiter. Despite the fact that it's a failed binary as a companion to our sun, because it is still producing low levels of fusion, that what we're dealing with an unusual programming agent. So our particular situation here, in terms of the way in which we are in the crossfire of the neutrino programming field, that not only do we have this, enclosed shell of our neutrino programming, but to understand that the way in which we're being programmed is quite complex. It's not the basic, unique, filtered string, the kind of thing that you're going to see when we look at the stars as an example. These are not going to be trinary crystal systems. They're going to be singular systems in those stars. And that singular crystal is simply going to be generating its neutrino string. But because all the crystals are unique in nature, the information that star is actually producing is going to be unique from the information that other stars, as an example, are producing. But when it comes to the sun, it's even more complex. And it's even more complex because this happens to be the place where consciousness in form is going on. I mean, this is why all of that is focused here. It's one of those jokes, you know. Ancient man was convinced that the earth was the center of the universe. And then science came along and said, no, that's not true. We're this planet out here from this sun, and this sun is part of that galaxy, and that galaxy, we're not even in a kind of great place there, and blah, blah, blah. And there's all the rest of this and everything else. Well, very good. That's nice. But again, if you look at that through the nature of the cosmology that I was given, we all come back to what all the ancients understood. This is where it's going on. This is where the show is. This is where the process is. This is where the great investment of the consciousness of the totality is. You know, everything is being pointed towards, the development of this consciousness form principle. It is frightening to think that with all of that focus, of all of that consciousness, that when you look at the way in which the illusion operates on this planet, you've got to shake your head. It's like, whoa, what a trip all of this is, and look at what the results are now. But I know from the cosmology that we are billions of years from the close of this process. Billions. Jeez. I'm not going to pass judgment on what the illusion looks like now, when there is such a road that is ahead. But the understanding of the dog and the camel, now this is truly mystical. There are a lot of mythologies that relate to these two. You could talk about Jesus and the devil, and you can talk about the god of darkness or the goddess of darkness and their counterpoint. You can talk about many things. The camel and the dog are really quite extraordinary. I mean, they are quite extraordinary. They're part of the deepest programming that we receive. And the other thing that is so extraordinary about them is that they come into form. I mean, they come into form. It's not like, they simply are outside of the process. They literally come into the process. Now, it says never in the form of raves, and I was not told, what that meant, in the sense that I don't know if they come in as mammals, birds, plants, a cell. I have no idea. I don't know in that sense. I only know of one particular case of that, and that's something that I'll save for later, because that's a great mystical story, but we'll get there because it has to do with one of the great programming stars of the sky. The dog manifests and maintains the body and the life of the sun itself, and it is the dog that generates the string. So look, if you think about it, if it's the dog that generates the string, the first thing to realize is that everything about the nature of our consciousness is rooted in this filtering. This is the foundation. The foundation is like every other star that is going to be a programming agent, that's going to be endowed with one of these primary crystals, that their unique aspect is going to, be the informing agent of what their neutrino stream or their neutrino string is going to bring as a consciousness. But then there are two things that get in the way. I mean, we're dealing with the concept of crystal. It says at the beginning here that the center sits at the heart of the sun and filters the string at source. In other words, it filters the string where the dog is, at the dog, with the dog. In other words, that the generating of the life of the sun itself, the maintenance of the life of the sun, and this whole initiating of the neutrino program is going through the center crystal. In other words, Earth has always been programmed by the single aspect that is the microcosm of the totality. This is our body. We are it, and it is us. We are it, and it is us. And you see, we are being programmed to be connected to the totality. See, the dog itself, our son's dog, is like any one of us. It is a unique personality. Simply a unique personality. And if we only received the dog alone, then we would only receive its unique personality. Only. So what we get is that the dog is putting that unique generation of string through the center. It's being filtered by the center so that, in fact, we are being programmed by every possible connection to the whole. Every possible connection to the whole. That's an extraordinary thing to think about. We are not being given differentiated aspects. If you're attuned to Alcyone, and you're only receiving the information of Alcyone, and by the way, if you read the better of the Pleiadian writings, you'll see the limitation. Yes, you can receive consciousness from these stars, and you will dress it up anthropomorphically any way you can, in the same way of all kinds of channelers that have been channeling crystal bundles for years and just simply giving the bundles names, because they don't know what it is. They actually think they're talking to an entity, when in fact, there's just a whole bunch of crystals that in their particular geometric formation are filtering the outside neutrino stream. And, the ones who are receiving it are anthropomorphizing it. But you see, the sun's different. It is not this, differentiated, solely differentiated aspect. And what we will get to see is that there are basically four forces, beyond the nature of our sun. There are four forces, whose specific uniqueness has formed the foundation of the potential for the entire incarnative process and the evolutionary process in form. But it is the sun that informs us. And the sun informs us not relative to any specific, but informs us so that we are connected in our programming with everything. With everything. See, at the mystical level, if you took all the crystals of consciousness on this planet, what they would represent is the potential of the ajna of the totality. This is the ultimate form principle construct. This is what it is all about. And it's very important to understand that because that is within the cosmology, what in fact all of our consciousness represents, that we are in fact designing the nature of the vehicle. We're building the universe. Now don't get vain. But it's true. We are building it. Building it. Out of form, the design crystal is dormant. In form, it builds. And this is what we are building. And you see, the fact that we are being imprinted by a universal program, not a specified program, but a universal program, and it's only possible because it is the center that is the matrix through which the neutrino string comes. And we are no longer, the byproduct of what a singular approach would be, which would mean that there truly would be no life as we know it on this planet. See, we are here to build the form of the whole Each and every one of us are aspects of an enormous evolutionary engineering program that's going on. It's incredible. The complexity and vastness of it to our little tiny scale. But it's also deeply magical. When you look out at the sky today, you're looking out at your own body from the inside. It's your body. And you've participated for billions of years in the process of its evolution. You never missed a step all along the way. So the first thing to deal with when you're looking at, the sun, is to begin to understand how complex it is. The fact that there are 3 crystals in the sun leads to an understanding of all these various trinities that have been lying around for years in all kinds of belief systems. The sun is what it's all about. And it is the dog, this role of creating the potential of the neutrino ocean. This generation of the potential for life itself. What an extraordinary aspect this is. I think it's a fascinating and rather odd thing that according to Christian mythology, it is written in the New Testament that for some odd reason, dogs are not welcome in heaven. And that should give one some pause for thought. I mean, one of the things to recognize about the nature of the dog is that the dog represents the fundamental programming of human consciousness. And what that means is knowledge. So the dog in that sense is a source of knowledge. All dogs in that sense represent sources of knowledge. In the Jovian TV, my monthly TV magazine, I was talking about this month's Sanduliak and the 1987A, this supernova that took place in February of 1987. And of course this was a rather dramatic death. This sort of like getting hit by a car, it's one of these really dramatic deaths. And when that star died, all of that information, the end of its whole process, all of those things, all of that information was transmitted out of its dog, from its dog. So here we have this, it's just interesting. Here's all this knowledge, and the source of what we can call knowledge. I mean, after all, it is simply neutrino information, and neutrino information that by the miracle of our own crystals is interpreted into consciousness through the complexity of everything that we understand and design. And yet, how amazing it is, and also the joke. I mean, dogs are not welcome in heaven. I think that's particularly delicious myself, but nonetheless, that's my particular sense of humor. This next plate, by the way, isn't the way that it appears in your plate collection, as you will see. And I've only done this so that I can just isolate the dog information by itself and not confuse it with the camel, because the two of them, at the time that I was doing these plates, I never presumed that at some point I would be doing a course like this where I would try to annotate them or footnote them, because basically that's what I'm doing. I'm footnoting all of this. And so in this particular case, I've just altered this plate so that I can just look specifically at the dog. So if you're looking for it in your collection, you'll see that it's part of a plate, and I've just removed the other stuff so that we're not distracted. And I will deal with it next time when we come together to look at the camel, which is one of those really extraordinary pieces of business. Anyway, one thing at a time. In this round, the dog has yet to incarnate. let's think about this for a moment now. It's the dog that generates the neutrino string. Right? Okay. So what does it mean when the dog is going to incarnate on Earth? I mean, it's not like it's going to produce the neutrino string from here. After all, a crystal can only operate within the limitation of its form. But what does it mean when the sun doesn't produce neutrinos? It means that at the astrophysical level, that there is a sputter in the fusion engine of the sun. It is a major trauma for Earth when this takes place, a major trauma. The physical body of the sun is disturbed, with vast increases in the output of ultraviolet energy waves. The dog incarnates at the lowest levels of life and has never been in form longer than 3 months. It will incarnate in 2084 in July. I love that. In July. I mean, why was, it's one of the most fantastic things for me about being a passenger watching my own movie. I dutifully recorded, that it's going to come into form in 2084 in July. But I mean, why such a date? It's like other dates that the voice gave me, and it did not give me dates for everything, but it certainly gave me, quite a few of these kinds of markers. I assumed that it is a double-edged sword. See, I do a course like this, aside from the fact that it's choiceless. The rationale after the choicelessness is that it's good to have witnesses, because there are things that are stated in this process that when in fact it happens, there's evidence. There's real evidence. At least there is, it was there. It's like the first time that, I was recorded doing an introductory lecture in actually 1991. That was the moment that it was on record that, that human design predicts that neutrinos will have mass. So there's a way of going back and saying, look, this is not a fashionable concept that we picked up after the fact. This was something that was there long before any of this became, something that the general lay public would even be aware of, and most people still aren't aware of what neutrinos are, whether they got mass or not. They don't give a damn. Anyway, there's obviously something deeply significant about this event that's going to take place. It's obviously going to be significant, and it's one of the things that we have an enormous amount of scientific apparatus right now that it looks at the sun and tries to figure out what's going on, because after all, the sun is a living thing, and every once in a while it burps or hiccups, and all the satellites on Earth got fuzzy, and the solar winds come ripping by, and there are all kinds of concerns about understanding the way in which the sun operates and the life of the sun. So it's obvious to me that such an event like this, this is the kind of event that within the next 40 or 50 years, if science still has the interest, it's the kind of thing that they may even see coming, whatever the case may be. However, it is something that has happened before. It hasn't happened in the last, 16,000 years or whatever that may be, or 18,000 years. It's not something that happens often, and obviously it's an extraordinary marker. It says something else. It says that there will be no information from the sun the moment that the dog incarnates. In other words, that solar programming, for as long as the dog incarnates, is going to stop, which means that the only programming that will exist will be stellar programming, and will be, whatever neutrino programming is available from Jupiter. It also means that if you look at it from the curiosity level of design, one of the things that's so interesting is that it will mean that the nodes are going to be the most significant activation when that takes place. What the byproduct of that is going to be is hard to say. For example, the Earth is already experiencing an enormous depletion in its ozone layer, something that supposedly is the byproduct of the greenhouse effect, and supposedly the byproduct of the pollution of our environment. The ozone layer opening up is only a concern in the sense that it allows in ultraviolet light. And of course, the ultraviolet light that come in is a sterilizing agent. It's a blinding agent, and it's a sterilizing agent. So this output of high ultraviolet light energy and the continued breakdown of the ozone layer may in fact also represent a great deal of life force damage that may take place at this time. It is hard to be able to predict any of that, because I was given no ramifications other than the obvious trauma. And the way I experienced being told about this was trauma. This is something that is a vast shakeup, and will very much have to do with ultimately with people's geometries. But my concern is that because the nodes are so deeply connected with vision, the way in which we see, and because ultraviolet rays are so connected with blindness, that I don't even want to go any further with that train of thought, because it isn't pretty in that sense where it could go to. What is clear to me is that this is a monumental event. And it's also clear to me that these are the kinds of events that come in the closing of the round. And I'm not talking about the closing of the cycle in 2027. I'm talking about the closing of the round more than 1,000 years later, when literally this whole experimentation in, being self-reflected consciousness in form is literally going to come to an end. And I think this is all about that process of bringing these things to their culmination. There's something to keep in mind that mystically we will look at in the coming weeks, is that the general program for life on this planet as we know it is already breaking down. I mean, it's already breaking down. And we have already lost one of the pillars of the program in terms of the way in which the general cosmos impacts us, and the way in which the incarnative process is maintained. And what is really breaking down is the ability to maintain the incarnative process. And of course, this is something that, well, it's really fascinating. It is the most interesting part of cosmology for me, is when I actually begin, to contemplate the physical mechanism that programs our planet. And as you will see, that physical mechanism is made up of stars and planets and moons, working in a kind of integrated harmony, and the byproduct of which is the potential for this reincarnative process. Remember that reincarnation is an interesting thing, because this is the end of the reincarnative cycle. In other words, the next 1,000 years or so, all of us who have been aspects that continually incarnate, that this whole process of going in and out of form is going to come to an end. So the work that's taking place now is really very important at a larger scale. In other words, it is about the final form, in essence, that we are going to have to deal with. A form that is going to carry us billions of years into the future. So there is already a breakdown in the way in which incarnation is operating. And one of the ways in which that's breaking down is that, it's going to sound weird, but the certain forces that are intended to incarnate don't necessarily get into incarnation. And forces that are not intended to incarnate are coming into incarnation. And when I say intended, not intended, simply in terms of the way in which the correct program operating with all of its elements, that is the way that it would work. But we're not operating that way anymore. And so there is dysfunction in the incarnative process. By the way, the positive side of that dysfunction in the incarnative process is one of the things that leads to the potential evolution of rave children in 2027. There are so many aspects that are at work that are far beyond, the normal perception of things, or even the potential of deep imagination to understand how such a mechanism can operate. And of course, this mechanism operates through the agency of all these dogs. These crystals, these unique crystals that endow these objects with what appears to be a personality. It isn't that they are. But you see, the crystal, because it is unique, can only be interpreted uniquely. However one interprets, the neutrino essence that one receives from any one of these stars. But oh boy, when you begin to think of them in the same way that you can think of a dog or a plant, when you begin to realize that these are consciousness forces, then you can begin to see that there are archetypes of these forces that work in consort, that have been working in consort from the beginning. I mean, it's always about building. All of this had to be built. All of this potential to create this incarnative wheel of a process, all of this had to be constructed. All of it. Not only did it have to be constructed, but it had to inherently have the knowledge, in that sense, within its very capacity. This magic of design and its ability to simply build the form that is going to house the consciousness. And if you take all the design crystals, all of the design crystals are creating a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts, that is a vast form that houses the potential of consciousness. And it's in the neutrino. And the neutrino is from the dog. And those forces out there, they are the forces that are maintaining our existence in here. Now the dog of the sun, obvious for us that any time that there is going to be a destabilization of the sun, that we are all going to be at risk. Everyone. We all rely on it, depend on it. But then again, we don't know how long it will incarnate. I mean, we don't know. It's never been in form longer than 3 months. But it incarnates once every 19,000 years. Who knows what all that was in the past. Maybe it'll only incarnate for 10 minutes. It'll come in as a housefly and die in a few moments. You never know. I don't know. I don't know how that works. I don't know if it'll be a bump. And all the scientists will say, wow, the sun just did something really weird. Or that it really is a trauma, a deep trauma. We lose our programming. Can you imagine? No, you can't. You can't. It's hard to imagine because you don't know what it's like to be in a world without the sun. Don't know what it's like to be in a world without the imprint, the neutrino forecast of every day, the 70% that imprints everything. And think about the fact that the children, any children, being born in that time will not be imprinted I mean, they won't be imprinted directly by the sun. I don't know what that means. You know, we will see, for example, because we will discuss this next time about the camel. You know, the camel incarnated basically during the Second World War. There's a whole generation of people that have been programmed differently by the sun than other people of other generations, you know, or all the other people, as I can put it. But I'll talk about that next time when we talk about the camel. So this is an event that is going to be extraordinary. And the voice obviously has made it clear that this is an essential date that should be known. And so here it is. This 2084 in July, whatever that may bring us. One of the things I have not looked, but anyway, I would imagine that the nodes for the month of July in 2084 are going to be enormously significant. But it is just one of these fascinating things to understand that we are in a destabilization time. The program is breaking down. The incarnative process is breaking down. We have an evolutionary mutation that is taking place. We have gates that are changing their quality. I mean, you know, think about the 55th gate and the 39th gate and the 49th gate and the 19th gate and the 59th gate and the 6th gate. You know, all of these gates are already changed from what I described them as in 1987. I mean, they've already changed. I mean, it is clear to me, for example, that I've actually felt the difference in 55 energy, particularly because I focus on it, and 49 energy because I was born with it, and it's my only activation in my emotional system. It's obvious to me that these gates are already changing their value. I mean, already. And you have to see that the program is breaking down. I mean, it's breaking down. And I don't just mean it in the sense that I put it out publicly in terms of 2027 and the fact that we are entering into a new global cycle, and the cycle that we're, you know, leaving behind, this cross of planning, going into, you know, the whole sleeping phoenix phenomena. It's not just about the fact that on the surface, in the way in which we integrate with each other, that there's going to be a breakdown in the tribal collective agreement, because that's what the cross of planning brings, this agreement between the demands and needs of the tribe and the collective recognition of them, and through that, you know, the development of order in civilizations. Now that's coming, you know, clearly apart. Institutions are no longer able to protect us, to look after us in the way that they promised 50 years ago, 100 years ago, or whatever the case may be. All of that is something that is collapsing. But I want you to understand that this is only the surface gloss on what is a much, much deeper process. Let me put it to you this way. All of the programming, everything about programming, is always based on the number 5. Always. Everything. And the number 5 is basically always the way in which you can look at bases. You see that there is a square, a 4, that really is the reality. 4 corners. And we will look at the 4 corners. You know, these are the 4 corners. And when the 4 corners are working in harmony, then there is an illusion that emerges out of all of it. This is the 5th. You know, to paraphrase a good movie, it's the 5th element. So when you're looking at the world that we're in now, and the way in which the forces of transformation are working, if you look at this drawing, look carefully at the drawing in the illustration. Look carefully. And you will notice something, that in the lower right-hand corner of the dog, there is a dab of blue. It's not all black. There's this spot there. And you can look at that spot in 2 ways. You can look at it as one of 4 beams of a temple in which it is beginning to decay and crack. Or, you could look at it as a disease, that is eating away at a whole function. And of course, the fact that this fourth element no longer exists. I mean, it no longer exists. As we move along, I will explain it, but it no longer exists. So we don't even have this kind of image anymore. What we have is trying to compensate with a triangle instead of a square. And basically, the way in which the whole program is operating, the way in which the yang-yang is being terminated, and this is one of the allusions to that, the way in which we're moving towards what is truly yin, though it has yang pretense in it. That we are also in a time in which everything that has been built, all of the infrastructure that was created for this grand experiment in self-reflected consciousness, that it is not here that it's falling apart, it's there. Every once in a while, I'm reminded of the film The Matrix, and it was a delightful piece of thought, that film. And there is a very disturbing scene where, in the first film, there is a number of these humans who have, inserted themselves into the illusion, inserted themselves into the matrix, and there is a double agent, traitor left behind that disconnects them, and you see them just simply stop and dissolve, in the sense that they simply collapse into a helpless death. And one of the things to really grasp about what's going on here is that there's a plug being pulled. It's breaking down. The whole thing is breaking down. I mean, the fact is, it's all already over, but we don't know it yet. And that, of course, has to do with the way in which Einstein and time operates. We have not reached the point where it will be obvious yet, but it has already happened. And so there are already indications of this collapse and breakdown in the process. I mean, for many, many, many years now, I've been telling people that there is going to be a population crash as we move into the latter half of this century. And this population crash is connected to this phenomena of the dog. It is connected to the fact that this corner that has broken down, that it is going to begin to have impact on what we will call fertility, sterility. Those of you that have listened to my lectures about 2027 for years now, in my discussion of what is going to happen through the polarity of the 55-59, you know that I have talked about the fact that it's going to be more and more difficult for human beings to be fertile. And it's going to be more and more necessary for us to use the tools we're developing now, artificial ways to be able to create a viable pregnancy. But it is not simply that it's about the 55-59, because that goes back to even grander programming, if you will. In other words, there's layers and layers and layers of this, and it's operating all the way through the entire hierarchy, and it all started with the breakdown of this programming. So we're in a time in which the illusion is beginning to crackle, and it's beginning to fall apart.